Hi, good afternoon. Happy holidays, everyone. I'm Scott Silverman, co-founder of CommerceNext. We are a community event series and conference for marketers at retail and DTC brands. I'm coming to you live from the beautiful and festive Rockefeller Center. Just don't ask why it's dark out at 2 p.m. But welcome to our annual Cyber Week recap webinar. It's a great opportunity to get caught up on how things are going in holiday 24 and get some ideas for what 2025 is going to be like from an e-commerce perspective. And as always, we'll be taking your questions. Feel free to load those up during the presentation. Thank you all for tuning in or making the time to join live or listening to the replay. I want to start with a few very important thank yous. First, I want to thank today's speakers who are taking some time out of their busy schedules to share their thoughts and experiences that's going on to help you all compare and contrast what you're seeing in your own businesses. Jason Goldberg from Publicis, Joe Milano from Tapestry, Sabrina Cherubini from Hanky Panky, Carolyn, Pollock at Tailored Brands, and John Reagh at Session AI. And I want to give a special thank you to Session AI for being today's webinar sponsor, and we really appreciate them making room for Jason's always terrific data-rich presentation of what happened during Cyber Week so far. And overall, we just could not bring these webinars to our audience without the support of our sponsors. So we really appreciate them supporting us and all of you on this. A couple things I want to mention before we jump in. We're hosting our annual holiday charity party in LA tomorrow, December 12th. And we had a great party last night in New York City with about 200 people. It's a fundraiser for St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. There's some fun prizes that you can win. And Katja's going to place the registration link in for the party in the chat if you're in the LA area and we have room if you want to join us. And we have our NRF party on Monday, January 13th in New York. There'll be over 100 e-commerce leaders there, or actually they're already RSVP'd, and we're doing our Commerce Excellence Awards and ceremony again on Monday, January 13th. We'll be again at the Rubin Museum in Chelsea. And Katja is also placing a registration link there. If there's any folks that are interested in sponsoring, our Chief Revenue Officer, Emily Wander, you can email her at emily@commercenext.com to be part of that as a sponsor. And we're excited to announce our first webinar of next year. It's going to be on Wednesday, January 22nd. It's the 2025 Digital Retail Forecast, Opportunities, Challenges, and Strategies. It's an opportunity to do a deeper dive into what is going to be shaping 2025 in the world of e-commerce and retail. Sucharita from Forrester is going to be presenting. It's moderated by Noam Paransky, former Chief Innovation and Digital Officer at Tapestry, Bo Bass, the CMO at Full Beauty Brands, and moderated by our fellow co-founder, Alan Dick, and sponsored by RTB House. So again, there's a link in the chat to sign up for that. And it's not too early to register for our big June event, the e-commerce growth show, June 24th to 26th. We have free registration for retailers at scaled brands, and we also have a travel program where you can get up to $1,200 in travel reimbursements for participating in our one-on-one meetings program. Go to commercenext.com/conference or look in the chat for a link. So all kinds of things for everyone to participate in CommerceNext in the next few months and even into mid next year. Wanted to just remind everyone about our YouTube channel. There's over 330 videos there on every e-commerce topic that you could imagine, and so much more. All of our webinars and past event sessions are there for you to take a look at. So the agenda for today's webinar, we're going to kick off with Jason Goldberg's Cyber Week recap. And then we're going to jump into some audience polling questions. And then we have our panel discussion with Tapestry, Hanky Panky, Tailored Brands, and Session AI. Don't worry about missing anything. We're recording the webinar, and you'll get a link by the end of today or tomorrow morning with the replay, so you can go and watch it again or catch something that you may have missed. And I just want to show you a few things on your screen so you can take full advantage of this. Everything is on the upper right of your of the big marker console, the chat, Q&A, polls, and handouts. One thing to remember is we encourage asking questions to the panelists. We'll try to take as many of those as we can. And you can also, even if you don't ask a question, you can upvote other questions that you see. That helps us prioritize which questions that we're going to take and have the panel cover. And then finally, if you're watching the replay, note that the handouts are available. Just click on the highlighted document icon in the video player. And there is a handout of Jason's presentation and also a presentation from Session AI that you can download as well. So with that, I want to now introduce Jason. He's a good friend of CommerceNext. I believe this is the fourth cyber recap webinar that he's done with us, and we're very grateful for that. In addition to his day job as the Chief Commerce Strategy Officer at Publicis, he is half of the team of the Jason and Scott podcast. He is just a fountain of knowledge about retail and e-commerce. If you are not already following him on LinkedIn or listening to the Jason and Scott podcast, I encourage you to do that. So, Jason, thanks for joining us again, and excited to hear your Cyber Week recap.
Yeah, Scott, thanks for having me again, and happy holidays, everyone. Especially thanks to Scott and Veronica for inviting me back. My birthday is December 10th, so this has become a birthday tradition to me, is have a little cake and then talk about the Cyber Week with all my friends online. So 4 years ago when Scott first asked me to do this, I told him it was too early. So you want to know what happened over Cyber Week? The reality is we don't know. There's not reliable, trustworthy, comprehensive, well-vetted data that I can share with you that definitively talks about it. So what we're doing is grabbing a bunch of breadcrumbs, a bunch of signals about the positive and negative things that happened leading up to and during Cyber Week to try to infer how holiday is going while we're all right in the middle of it. And so we're gonna. It's kind of data heavy. Scott was nice enough to call it data rich, which I think is a euphemism for data puke. But as he mentioned, the deck's available, so you don't have to remember any of this. I really just want you to sort of understand the positive and negative trends, so you can sort of understand where your own business or your client's businesses might fit in the overall mix. Is that fair? Scott mentioned I'm the boring half of the Jason and Scott show. You can never have enough Scott, so Scott has been a guest on the Jason and Scott show like 4 times. Scott's parent, the original Scott Wingo spelled his name wrong, so you can find us on iTunes by just typing Scott with 1 T. So I want to start by reminding you what 2023 is like, because we're comparing ourselves in 2024 to 2023. And so in 2023, we sold $7.2 trillion worth of stuff. That was not a phenomenal year. It was up to a little over 2% from the year before. It was up quite a lot from before the pandemic. It was up 34%. A lot has been going on lately, so all these comps are super interesting. But this is the last time I'll talk about retail sales, because I like to zero in on a slightly smaller subset of retail sales that the NRF calls core retail sales. So this is retail sales without restaurants, gasoline, and automobiles. There's sometimes when we might want to talk about those 3 categories, but for our purposes, we're talking about $5 trillion in spending in 2023. And that $5 trillion of spending without the volatility of gas and cars was actually a little better. It grew 3.9% last year, which is a decent year by historic standards. So when you say, how are we doing in 2024, what we'd really like to do is beat that 3.9% that we had last year. And how we're doing year to date, we have 10 months worth of data. We've sold $4.3 trillion worth of stuff. So we're on track to be up 3.5%. I mentioned last year we were up 3.5%. And of course, we'll be talking about the subset of this revenue that's e-commerce. E-commerce year to date, we've sold about $840 billion worth of stuff. That money would be 15% of all retail. It would be 20% of core retail. It's up about 7.5% from the previous year. And if you go look at history, in general, core retail has grown. If you look at the 10 years before the pandemic, because the pandemic kind of threw everything into a tizzy. If you look at the 10 years before the pandemic, retail grew 4.1%. Retail is all sales, so it's online and offline together. And then if you just pull e-commerce out, e-commerce would grow 14% a year. So these are kind of the targets we're aiming at. 4.1% growth for retail, 14.7% for e-commerce. If we zoom in on the last couple of years, you can see the crazy stuff that the pandemic did to us. And right now, both of these numbers are well low of the 10-year average, right? So retail, I mentioned, year to date is 3.5%, and e-commerce year to date is 7.5%. By historic standards, neither one of those is particularly phenomenal, but they're in line with the last couple of years post-pandemic. Of course, whenever we talk about e-commerce in the pandemic, there's this common narrative that like, oh man, there was a huge spike in e-commerce because of the pandemic, and then everything regressed to the mean, and we're right back to where we started. And it really depends on how you look at it. If you look at it as a percentage of retail, if you look at it based on revenue or transactions, there are all these different ways to slice it and dice it. But at its most fundamental, what you should know is that e-commerce has grown 115% since the pandemic. We've more than doubled the amount of stuff we sell online, and that is a sustained, durable change in consumer behavior. So digital, I think we've all known, has been important for a while. Scott was one of the co-inventor coiners of Cyber Monday, when we first started spending money online. It's a big deal. We're going to talk more about it. So let's jump into holiday 2024 specifically. But I have a couple caveats I always like to give everyone when we talk about holiday spending. If you read the media or you read the press releases from a lot of retailers and, frankly, trade organizations, you're going to quickly find out that this was the most amazing, best Thanksgiving weekend ever. And so in your office, if you didn't have the most amazing Thanksgiving of all times, then you might be feeling like you're underperforming because per all the media, it was the greatest holiday weekend of all times, right? We set a record. Everything's a record. We set a record $10.8 billion spending online. We spent $41 billion over the weekend. All of these records, everything is higher than it's ever been before. And I just want to remind you all that that's normal. That's not a great holiday. Two things that have gone up every year since I've been alive is the population and prices. So maybe one exception in my very long lifetime, but you have to remember there are more people than there have ever been before, and they spend more money for each thing they bought than they ever have before. So setting a record is not telling us anything, and it's not a benchmark that we should be trying to receive. So when we read all of these glossy reports about setting a record, the first thing I'd remind you is that's not a good KPI. That we should have a KPI based on your historic growth and what you expect to grow next year. The other thing is, if you're curious how holiday was, the one way not to find out how holiday is to ask consumers what they did, or even worse, what they plan to do. So I'm making fun of my good friends at Deloitte that run this holiday shopper study. It's super informative. There's lots of really pretty graphs in here telling us what consumers are going to do this holiday season and what categories are going to be up and down and all this super helpful data. And I just want to remind you that they interviewed 4,000 customers in August and asked them what they were going to buy people for Christmas presents, right? And it hopefully isn't going to shock anyone to know that that's not a super reliable way to understand what consumers actually do. And the way I like to think of this is if any of you are as old as me, you'll remember this very popular TV show that Silverman and I love, House. This is Greg House. In the show, he's He's the greatest diagnostician of all times. He's the super fancy doctor you turn to when no one can figure out what's wrong with you, and he figures out all the rare, bizarre medical ailments that you have and how to treat them. And one common theme that Dr. House had throughout his entire medical career is he never talked to patients or asked them any questions. And when his interns would say, well, why don't we ask the patient? He had a very simple response to the interns.
It's the basic truth of the human condition that everybody lies. The only variable is about what.
So he liked to use empirical data about people's health instead of asking them, because he wasn't able to get reliable, trustworthy diagnostic information from his patients. And in the same way, we can't do a survey of consumers and ask them what they are going to spend on. That we call surveys stated preferences. And what we really want is observed preferences. In stated preference surveys, every alcoholic can stop drinking whenever they want. We're all going to spend money on green energy, and none of us are going to eat any fattening foods this year, right? And so it won't come as a surprise to anyone that everyone has more altruistic stated holiday spending plans than what they end up actually spending. And so what I'm going to give you here are these little breadcrumbs of observed preferences that we've seen that are telling us what happened this holiday. So the first thing you need to know about this holiday is it started a month early, right? Like everybody had their Black Friday sales in October this year. The promotions have creeped forward every year, but this year was really different. This was really the year that consumers responded to a lot of these early sales. The last several years, people have had early sales in October, but we never saw a spike in October sales. This year, Amazon, Target, Walmart all had major sale events in October, and October sales went way up. In general, the 10 years before COVID, October sales go up 3.9% a year. This year, October sales went up 5.4%. So we had a much more robust October than we have in a long time, partly as a result of those sales, partly over anxiety about upcoming increases in prices. Everyone was thinking about the election and what might happen that would negatively affect them, all those sorts of things. And so we had this really robust October. And so then we come into what the official holiday season, which historically has been November through December or November through January, depending on who you talk to. And when we talk about holiday sales, the average for the 10 years before COVID was 3.6% a year. So last year we had a good year. We, as I mentioned, core retail sales were up 3.9%. So this year for 2024, if you know nothing else, what you'd like to do is get at least that 3.6% historical average and maybe even match the 3.9% we got last year. Now, the forecasts that we got for this year were not that optimistic. There's a bunch of people that forecast, but the one that we see the most is National Retail Federation put out their forecast for holiday using the exact same criteria I just discussed. And they are predicting that holiday would be between 2.5 and 3.5. So if they get the high end of their forecast, that's an average year for us. If they get the low end of their forecast, that's, frankly, a disappointing holiday season for most of us. Again, you'll notice the bar is higher every year. We set a record every year. That's not the goal. The goal is to beat these historic averages. The NRF felt there were a lot of headwinds that were gonna, not allow us to have an amazing holiday season this year. And so then we jumped into November. Remember, we had all these sales in October, and through the first half of November, we had a really poor November. So this is data from Earnest, which is a big panel of credit card data. And from the first 2 weeks of November, sales were down 1.4% from the previous year. Now, a couple things going on there. Like, there was a very polarized election that had a lot of people anxious. And there, were a bunch of people that spent holiday money in October for the first time. And remember, we had this this extraordinarily high October. So the first half of November was kind of poor. And so we all went into the holiday weekend, the Turkey 5 weekend, really nervous because we'd have to have a much better than usual Turkey 5 to compensate for this slow November. Potentially, we hurt ourselves by pulling all these sales into October, which resulted in a soft first half of November. So then we get into the holiday weekend. There's a couple ways we see holiday data. Sensormatic and RetailNext sell hardware that retailers install on the door of their store to count foot traffic. And they're allowed to anonymize that data and aggregate it. And so they both reported, based on counting actual doors, on peep traffic going into doors on the front of mostly chain retailers, they both said, hey, over holiday weekend, we saw fewer people walking in the stores than we did last year. The other data source we use for foot traffic is Placer AI. They have a panel of like 1 million users who have opted into sharing the GPS data on their phone. And so they see where those customers' phones go. And they saw traffic slightly up, but not up enough to beat the normal 3.9% growth that we're trying to get. So two of our 3 data sources said there's fewer people going in stores over holiday weekend. One of our sources said there were a few more people, but not as many as usual. And then we get some sales data. And so most of the sales data that we can get a week after the day is from credit card spending, right? And so that's both MasterCard Spending Pulse and Earnest data. They all report different periods, so we don't get a perfect number. But again, neither one felt Friday was a particularly good spending day. By many accounts, Friday is the biggest spending day of the year, or at least biggest spending day to date of the year. Depending on when Christmas falls, some of the later weekends can be big as well. But spending, MasterCard said sales on Black Friday were up less than 1%. Earnest said sales were up 1.4%. Earnest actually said that sales got stronger over the weekend. So Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday was a particularly strong sales day. And so they I think the whole weekend they said ended up 5.1%. So if that's true, increasing holiday spending 5.1% is very helpful, right? Again, if our goal is 3.9%, 5.1% is bigger, and these are all bigger days. So each day almost counts like 2 days. So that means we had 10 days of double our goal spending. Unfortunately, we had 14 days of way below average spending leading up to this. So even if these numbers are correct, this is probably not a big enough cyber weekend to make up for the soft November. And sure enough, if you look at Earnest reporting on the entire month of November, and they actually are reporting November as November 1st through December 4th, that's super important because Sunday and Cyber Monday fell in December this year. So if you look at like the U.S. Department of Commerce or NRF's November reporting, it's kind of not very helpful because the holiday fell over 2 months this year and it doesn't normally fall. Earnest normalized that by making November a little longer. And even so, November sales were only up 0.1% in 2024 from 2023. So that's puts a heck of a lot of pressure on having an amazing December in order to achieve even our modest forecast for November. So this, I would say, is worrisome on average. But of course, very few people on this webinar are experiencing the average. At the moment, we tend to have a very bifurcated economy where we have a lot of winners and we have a lot of losers. And so, there are people that are going to do way better than these 3.5% to 3.9% growth rates, and there are people that are on an objective basis not going to grow this year. If you look at the Earnest data and you break it out by sales channel, the biggest story is the direct-to-consumer companies are winning more holiday sales. Now, overall, direct-to-consumer is not a super exciting category. And a lot of the luster is off of the direct-to-consumer sales model. But over holiday, a lot of people are turning to direct-to-consumer to buy their gifts. And they're turning to a particular version of this, which is direct-to-consumer via social media, which we're going to talk about more in a bit. But just to kind of put this in perspective, 11% of sales in 2023, 11% of holiday sales were direct-to-consumer, and this year it's 22%. So it doubled, and it took a little bite out of most other categories. So you can see the wholesale channels are up a little bit. That's the Sam's, Costco, BJ's. Not surprisingly, department stores took a hit. They used to be 9.5% of sales. Now they're 6.2% of sales. One bright spot in here is apparel, which was 4.4% of holiday sales in 2016, and now it's 5.3%. So that's trending in the right direction. We've unlocked a little bit more apparel sales than we've had the last couple of years, and I know there's a lot of folks on this call that are in the apparel business or apparel adjacent. But of course, the biggest bright spot of holiday weekend is the e-commerce sales were robust, right? So you'll remember this year e-commerce sales haven't been particularly awesome. They've been up 7.5%. 7.5% is very healthy growth. It's more than twice what retail grows, but it's way lower than the 14% historical average. But when you look at this holiday weekend, all the numbers are significantly above that 7.4%. So both Adobe and Salesforce and MasterCard Spending Pulse break down online sales. We've mostly seen favorable trends. A lot more people are spending money online this holiday season, and that translates into a lot of that direct-to-consumer spending and a lot of direct-to-consumer from social spending. Let's dive into some of the key trends that are impacting these holiday results so far. So the first trend I want to call out is, of course, the buzz around AI. I have to tell you, AI is super important. We could, spend the next 12 hours talking about how it's likely to change commerce and shopping over the next 10 years. It's not economically meaningful in 2024 holiday sales, right? So it is not the case that 10% of all consumers, stopped using Google and started using Perplexity or OpenAI, or fundamentally changing how they shop this year. When we talk about how important AI is, we're talking about how potentially important it is to the future. Adobe did, kind of suss out their data and point out that, hey, people that did use AI tools to shop grew dramatically. It's up over 2,000%, but that's because it's less than 1% of sales. It's a tiny number. Tiny numbers grow much faster than big numbers, right? So we'll continue to watch this. I have a feeling it's going to be a very important story 5 years from now, but for this year, we're more talking about the promise than we are talking about the realization. But this next trend is very important. People used to discover stuff they wanted to buy on the shelf in a store. We used to have this lead source called Saw in Store, and it was the most powerful way that people discovered products to buy for holiday. And that's no longer true. The most important way people discover products to buy is on social media, right? And so, my definition of social commerce is you use social to discover something to buy regardless of where you bought it. So I'm not talking about just sales that happen on TikTok or happen on Instagram. I'm talking about sales that were initiated on these social platforms. According to Adobe and Salesforce, about 20% of all holiday sales came from this social discovery behavior. So $1 out of $5 started on social. And in particular, that does not mean ads from your brand on the social platforms drove these sales. The thing that really drives these sales is authentic, organic content from micro creators, micro influencers, right? And then Adobe measured that the impact of a piece of content from an influencer, a micro influencer on a social media platform has 6 times more efficacy than like brand-owned content on these social platforms. So this has become the new place we all have to go fishing. Is we all have to figure out how to get creators and influencers to talk about us on social media, because that's where they're discovering the new products to buy versus the products discovering products in store. And that's why we saw all this data that direct-to-consumer products were doing so well this holiday season. Now, the social platform that has the outsized influence in commerce is TikTok. And last year, TikTok did something very scary. They launched their own e-commerce site, right? So they have a subset of TikTok is what we call TikTok Shops. TikTok Shops is the fastest growing retailer in the history of mankind. They sold over $1 billion in goods in the United States in November. Over Black Friday, they sold $100 million alone. TikTok Shops is a very meaningful trend that you should all be paying attention to, figuring out if you should be using it or how you're competing with it. And fundamentally, the reason it's so successful is because of the reason I just talked about. All these customers are discovering products to buy on social media. The social media platform that's mostly winning for purchase intent is TikTok. And then TikTok bolted on a low friction e-commerce site that sits directly on their platform. So it's very easy once you discover those items in TikTok to buy them, and it's working, right? So this should be the scariest graph in my deck for all of us on this webinar. Who's winning this holiday? TikTok, Temu, and Shein by far, right? Shein was the fastest growing retailer in the history of mankind 2 years ago. Temu was the fastest growing retailer in the history of mankind last year, surpassed all of Shein's records. And TikTok Shops is the fastest growing retailer in the history of mankind, surpassing all the growth records of Temu and Shein. So 3 years in a row, direct-to-consumer companies from China have utterly won the market. These three companies alone have generated over $50 billion in sales in the United States of America this year. That might have gone to traditional Western retailers were it not for all of the interest and customer affinity that these direct-to-consumer from China businesses have launched. At the same time, and by the way, the vast majority of all the sales is beauty and apparel, right? Like we other categories are important. Don't underestimate how well these direct-to-consumer companies are doing in other categories. But for those of you that are in the apparel business, Shein was the largest apparel retailer in the US. TikTok is now a larger apparel retailer than Shein based on the last few months of sales. At the same time, who are the biggest losers on this chart? It's Lululemon, Nike, and Under Armour, right? So what's happening is consumers are less often opting for premium apparel brands sold through wholesalers, and instead are buying inexpensive, unbranded merchandise direct from factories in China, right? And this is a huge disruptive trend to all of commerce. It's not been a good year. It's not been a good season since the pandemic for consumer electronics. So folks like Best Buy are really struggling. The traditional department stores are all really struggling here. There are some great winning stories amongst the traditional brands. Victoria's Secret, Abercrombie and Fitch. We mentioned apparel is up. Of course, we're in this vibe session, which I'll maybe talk about later, where people are trying to save money. That's part of why all these inexpensive goods from Chinese factories are doing well. But it's also why very good discounters like TJ Maxx are doing well. And so while on average we're on track to have a mediocre holiday season, a little below our historical averages, some retailers are killing it in this environment, and a lot of traditional retailers are really going to struggle in this environment. And if you're curious what Amazon thinks of all this, their answer is if we can't beat them, we're going to join them, right? And so last month, Amazon launched, or I should say 2 months ago now, October, Amazon launched Amazon Haul, which is their answer to direct-to-consumer from China. It's them selling products from Chinese factories at prices that they hope are similar to Temu, Shein, TikTok Shops. This launched in late October or early November, depending on how you count. And it's kind of rudimentary compared to Temu, for example. So they have way fewer sellers. They have much less assortment. It is lower prices than Amazon, but it's not lower prices than Temu or Shein. It doesn't have all the social buzz and gamification that Temu and Shein have. And it really, when it launched, felt kind of underwhelming. But that was a soft launch. And then as we got close to Cyber Monday, Amazon uncorked, and by the way, everything on our super cheap Amazon haul site is now 50% off, and we're advertising it on the homepage of our website, which is the 7th highest traffic website in the United States of America. And so suddenly haul had a moment, right? And we started seeing all the best sellers on Amazon being products that came from haul. It was super short-lived. It was on Black Friday, haul sold a ton of stuff, but by Cyber Monday, they were out of goods. Everything was out of stock, right? And so, haul was just too young. It was too close. And so, I would say it had zero economic material impact on holiday 2024. But it's something we're going to watch really closely if they're able to sustain competition with the Temu, TikTok, Shein's, or how this all plays out over the next year is going to be super interesting. Another big trend for this holiday season is that increasingly young people want virtual goods, not physical goods, right? So you look at kids' Christmas lists, Legos used to be at the top of this list. Now it's Robux and Fortnite V-Bucks that kids want. And so, a lot of grandparents are increasingly miffed that their kids want these intangible things for the holidays. Of course, that ties into this trend that we're all spending more money on entertainment and subsequently have less money to spend on physical goods. So if you're someone that's always sold physical goods to holiday shoppers, you have greater competition from all of these alternative uses of consumers' discretionary spending. And then I just want to touch on a couple other trends before I open it up to the polling and the panel. Discounting has been really inconsistent this holiday. On average, discounting this year is similar to last year, but again, there's a huge bifurcation. A lot of distressed retailers are deeply discounting this year. So not only are their sales poor, but their margins are even poor as what they are selling. They're selling at a deep discount. And some of the retailers that did the best actually held the line and didn't have deep discounts. So we're kind of seeing level price points. Consumers are using buy now, pay later more than ever, which is interesting, arguably alarming from a consumer economic standpoint. We used to talk about whether mobile was going to be a sustained important thing in holiday. Salesforce said it was like 70% of all holiday spending. Adobe said it was 50% of all holiday spending. Don't know who's right, but it's super important that you're able to sell stuff to people on their phone. I mentioned earlier this vibe session. This is essentially 60% of Americans think we're in a recession. We are not in a recession. Most American consumers are cautious and don't feel great about the economy, despite the fact that the macroeconomics of the economy are actually pretty favorable. And of course, now we have this new thing. People are actually spending more. They're stocking up. Because they're worried that next year we're going to have high tariffs and all the cheap goods from China are suddenly going to become much more expensive, and we're going to have a pricing war. And so that's actually pulling some sales in as people try to get ahead of the tariffs, that are coming. So those are some of the trends I'm watching for this holiday. With that, I will take a breath, take a sip on my Starbucks. And I think we're passing it over to Veronica to put some questions out there before we introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much, Jason. Really appreciate you sharing all of that with our audience. I'm just going to do one question, and if we could bring that up, and it is, how are holiday sales compared to plan so far? And if many of you can respond and give your answer, that would be appreciated. I think everyone would like to get a sense of where it is among everyone, but the options are far ahead of plan, slightly ahead of plan, at plan, slightly behind plan, or far behind plan. So why don't we just quickly see where everybody is on the call, and then we'll jump into our panel. It's spread out. We have 12% that are far ahead of plan, 23% that are slightly ahead of plan, 26% that are at plan, 26% that are slightly behind plan, and 11% that are far behind plan. So quite mixed up among everyone on the call. Doesn't seem to be very consistent at all. All right, with that, why don't we bring our panelists up and have Jason join them as well. So John, Carolyn, Joe, Sabrina, thank you so much for joining us. I'm just going to jump in, see if we can get as much as we can. Why don't we just start with, I have some questions for each of you, but you know what I'm going to do is just skip the overall intros, or you can do a quick intro of who you are, and then I have a specific question for you. So we'll start with you, Joe. If you could introduce yourself, and then we've been seeing a lot of news reports about challenges in the luxury segment, and I'm interested to hear, how Tapestry is experiencing luxury right now as a luxury brand. So if you could introduce yourself and then give us a little insight into that would be great.
Yeah, sure. No problem, Scott. So Joe Milano, I lead digital here at Tapestry House of Brands. For those of you unfamiliar, Coach, Kate Spade, Stuart Weitzman. So interestingly enough, we looked at this past peak's performance, and I think overall we've been quite pleased with the way our customers been responding. It's actually tracking quite nicely that we've seen from a reaction perspective throughout the entire year so far. I think the key has really been about meeting the customer with the right product set, right prices, right marketing, which has been pretty successful as we kind of think about this kind of portion of the holiday season.
Awesome. All right, Carolyn, you could introduce yourself, and then, the question for you is how customers are, any differences you're seeing compared to earlier in the year or last holiday season, or, are you seeing customers gravitating towards different types of products or price points? Anything you can share about what you're seeing from customers this holiday season after introducing yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. So I'm Carolyn Pollock. I'm the CMO for Tailored Brands. We're a portfolio of menswear specialty retailers. Men's Warehouse is probably our best known banner. We also have Joseph A. Bank, K&G, and Moores in Canada. And yeah, this holiday season has been sort of the mix that I think others have been seeing as well. I would say our trends are generally in line with the market. What we have seen as real bright spots have been when we were dealing big deals like our doorbuster deals that we had over Cyber Monday drove a lot of activity. We've made a concerted effort this year to up our assortment in our sportswear and our accessories categories as giftables. For us, wedding season is typically our largest time of the year, and holiday isn't as big, but as we've increased in those categories, we're driving a lot more gifting occasions, and we built doorbuster deals around those categories as well. And where we had those, we saw really big uptake from the customer. So we're definitely seeing the customer being a little more price sensitive than normal and looking for those big deals. And otherwise, it's just sort of a little more like, as you said, Jason, a bit more kind of a stable holiday, not a gangbuster holiday.
Thank you. Sabrina, so Hanky Panky, want to have you again introduce yourself and talk about a partnership that is featured prominently this holiday season you did with Pantone. And if you can help us understand a little bit about like kind of what customer psyche are you tapping into with that? Why is that relevant now?
Hi, Scott. I'm Sabrina Cherubini. I lead marketing and everything digital for Hanky Panky, a premium lingerie brand. Thanks for the question, Scott, because I think that's really part of our strategy to increase our full price penetration. So we're really going against this kind of very discounted strategy. So that has been like an annual focus for us. And to be able to do that, you need to be able to be relevant to customers today. So Pantone is one example of what we're doing, having some great creative collaborations, honoring our DNA as a brand. Joe talked about great marketing, but going back to what makes us different, we're very colorful and joyful, and we're a heritage brand. And also there's a very big trend around nostalgia, right? So going back 25 years in colors was the idea. Every time before Cyber Week, I think something that I learned and worked very well for us is really getting our customers excited on full price. And then they show up during Cyber Week in a big way. So that was a good one for us, a little bit above the trends that Jason mentioned.
Thank you. John from Session AI, you have the advantage of seeing what a wide spectrum of retailers are doing and brands, leveraging your technology, AI in general. What are some of the things that have stood out to you this holiday season that's different in the past?
Yeah, Scott, appreciate that, and really enjoyed the overview, Jason, you provided. What we're seeing is a couple of interesting things. As was indicated in the presentation, there are increases in session count. This is specifically, of course, for e-commerce. About 20% if we average that across all our clients on a year-over-year basis. Revenues not up by the same percentage, but about half of that, about 10% year-over-year, which is interesting. But I would say in terms of how we're seeing the technology being used, it's more of a kind of a traffic specific type strategy. So as was mentioned, mobile is definitely growing. We would add to maybe the side of Salesforce in terms of percentage of traffic. We're seeing actually closer to 80% of our traffic being on the mobile side. But each of those with the ability to kind of zero in on a specific strategy based on the traffic, including things like social. And so if you can tailor the offer or the interaction, the experience, if you will, to the traffic, that seems to bring a lot more positive results as an outcome.
Thank you. And do you want to tease the handout, the Session AI handout? Anything they can read there that might give a little more color to what you just said?
Yeah, just maybe the context I would say is this is there's a lot of energy and again alluded to in the presentation around AI that's helping with client interface, and that's more kind of the chat GPT stuff that's helping with customer support and that type of thing. We're a behavioral AI tool. So we load on top of the website, and essentially what we provide our customers is a score of all the visitors. And the output of that score is who's very likely to purchase, who's not so likely to purchase, and maybe the most interesting group is who's on the fence and could make a purchase. And then if you're a marketer, what would you do if you could have that? And we're providing this with no PII, typically by the fourth or the fifth click. So it's very actionable information that's generated in the session while the visitor is still on the site to drive. Essentially, the main outcome is increased conversion rate, of course, which increases sales. And if you deploy kind of a full spectrum of strategy, it's also a margin saver as well.
Great. So Jason mentioned that he, in his overview, that he wasn't seeing like an extraordinary amount of discounting this holiday season, and we're all in this business for margin. That's the main goal of retail. And I was going to ask a question about how everyone's margins are relative to last year, but I wanted to spend more time on the panel discussion. I think you've already been answering this question a little bit in terms of it's about getting the product marketing right, knowing your customers, being in touch with the merchandising team. I don't know, if anybody has something. I mean, Joe, you had a pretty, I think, articulate, description of why you think some of the things that you're doing strategically can maintain those margins. If you wanted to, give us a little bit of a insight there. And Jason, I don't know if anything you're hearing as well on what we can expect from margins this holiday season.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in. I think, Jason, you talked a little bit about how discounting wasn't as prevalent, season over season. I think scarcity was definitely more in vogue this year than I think I've seen in, several years past. And I think for us, when I talked about the product and the marketing, I think the intersection of those two things really drove a lot of success for us when we think about it from a customer reaction perspective. And I think that's been, like I said earlier, it's been pretty consistent throughout the year. And for us to continue to tailor that, John, you talked about making sure that experience is tailored against the traffic. I mean, we think about that in the exact same way, which is like making sure that we're fulfilling that consumer's mission with the right product, with the right marketing, with the right experience holistically. And we've seen some pretty awesome outcomes.
Yeah, and Scott,
Jason,
maybe
anything you want to add? Or sorry, go ahead, Sabrina.
sorry,
You have something to
just
say?
a thought. You were talking about margin, but your margin represents your brand equity, kind of. So it's not just from a business perspective. It's how do you just not think short term, but long term, and protect your profitable growth. Well, we're talking about cyber. You cannot just devalue your brand all the time. So it's really sticking to a strategy, to just point a long term strategy that will protect your brand equity in the long run.
Yeah, and we found the same thing. I think, we've enjoyed better margins than we have in a while as we started using the doorbusters I was speaking about earlier, just more strategically, right? So using them as traffic drivers to get people in, but doing it with the products that we know will get that interest initially. And then we see the basket expand far beyond that. So that enables us to make sure that we're driving the right offers for the right types of products and help the margin. And then also leveraging tools like Session AI to be able to offer sort of incrementality better in terms of margins where, offers for people who we think need it to get over the hump and actually make the final transaction, and not to the people that we know are pretty directed and coming in with a purpose to buy from the outset.
Yeah, and I would just wrap it up, Scott. I'd say there's retailers that are going to do very well for margins this year. There's retailers that are going to struggle a little bit. On aggregate, I don't think it's going to be a great year for margins because we're seeing a lot of consumers trading down to more affordable goods, right? And so the margins on the more affordable goods, even when the retailer is still capturing that sale, are lower. And as we mentioned, it's going to be a very digital holiday. In general, at the moment, e-commerce is lower margin than brick and mortar. And so when all that direct-to-consumer spending tends to be 1 to 2 items, that's the lowest margin sale. You really need to be using tools like Session AI to sell 4 or 5 items in that basket to get those margins back up. In the long run, I'm sure digital will be very high margin, but right now it's a little margin erosive.
So wanted to shift a little bit to AI and Gen AI have been such dominant topics this year. I mean, we're now 2 years into ChatGPT, and get a sense of how it is affecting the customer experience and your as retailers, your ability to optimize. And John, maybe you could give us kind of an overall statement of like how far you think we've come in leveraging some of this AI technology. And then I'd be interested to hear from, the retailers on the panel, like any examples they could give of where it's really helped them optimize.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think on the generative side, on both, on the behavioral side, which we said, there's a lot of room still for expansion. I would probably say, if I could comment only on the behavioral side, having the machine make decisions over people in the future in terms of, as was mentioned earlier, maybe who should be incented or what type of nudge should be directed, and making that decision in nanoseconds is going to be better overall performance than having people guess behind the scenes and deploy a strategy that they look at after the fact and say, hey, how did this go? So I think there's lots of room for AI to help out in that buying journey. And so as we look to specific channels, as I mentioned earlier, and honing in on where that particular consumer is coming from, what type of intent do they have, we're very, very bullish about what we'll be able to do with the right retail partner going forward.
And Sabrina, how about you? What do you think has been the biggest impact on customer experience from AI or Gen AI so far?
Yeah, I think the one that we really brought to the further extent is really customer experience and customer service. Like, we're a premium brand, so we always maintain a very high quality of customer service and live customer service also on our website. So being able to automate 40% of our tickets without losing any points on our scores, that has been our goal since the beginning of the year. The amazing thing is you can free up some time from your team so they can focus on driving more growth. But from an efficiency perspective, it's a no-brainer for sure. As you know, on top of personalization, really helped us to achieve our plan during Cyber Week.
That's a great example. Joe or Carolyn, either of you seeing anything?
Yeah, one of the things we've been experimenting with is some of the beta programs that partners like Meta are offering, where we're able to submit a slew of assets, and they're able to create literally thousands of versions of ads that play with copy size and background colors and placement of product and placement of price points. And it's dramatic, the impact that can have in terms of, really getting a lot more driven around, what motivates particular customers and individuals in different ways. And we've seen significant increases in our return on ad spend as a result. So we're getting tremendously more, a lot more scale in our creative, but also seeing the return come through on the ad spend, which has been really great. And we're excited to do more with that.
Yeah, I would just add, I think, similar to what Sabrina and Carolyn said, I think, we're playing in similar spaces and in others as it relates to AI. I think the more unique thing to share is just some of the work that we've done in terms of deploying some of that like intelligence and AI in-house against some of our associate teams out in the field, and how we think about creating stronger two-way dialogues between those store field associates and some of our corporate partners in terms of information sharing, as well as understanding the scale and scope of some of that feedback that's come across, and removing the anecdotal nature of it and putting like real systemic barriers around it.
Great. All right. We have about 4 minutes left. So I want to shift to 2025. And maybe, each of you can give us like a short answer of, what do you think is going to be some kind of defining characteristics for you of, what your roadmap's going to look like, what you want to emphasize. Carolyn, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, we have a big focus on, we have an amazing acquisition engine with the customer activity we get through weddings and people coming to us for those very important moments. As we expand that assortment that we have in our sportswear and more casual clothing, getting customers to come back more frequently continues to be a big objective for us. And now, again, being able to leverage tools like Gen AI and better algorithmic targeting of creative to customers and recommendations, our ability to provide more personalized product recommendations and even offers will really help incentivize getting those customers back more frequently.
Sabrina.
Yeah, I think I had like 3 big words for my team. The first one is differentiation, continue our roadmap towards like brand and product differentiation, because that's really serving us from a growth perspective. The other one is like profitable growth in DTC, maintain, the profitability of our business as we acquire new customers. And the last one is like Carolyn, it's customer obsession. So really looking into all of your customer segments, acquisition, retention, LTV, etc. So really optimizing all of our plans there, leveraging AI also to help us scale and ramp up quicker than what we've been doing so far.
And Joe?
Yeah, I would just add, I think a couple of the underpinning things are really around efficiency and effectiveness. But I think kind of what drives the kind of top strategy is how we continue to stay brand led when we think about the platform and the engagement from a consumer perspective. Obviously, we talked a little bit about how do we continue to tailor that experience. I think we're still early on that. I think people are making progress, but I think there's still so much opportunity for us as we think about our brand portfolio and how that comes to life.
Awesome. And John, we'll give you the final word.
Yeah, appreciate that. I think what we're seeing, going back to the tailored experiences, is still just big. There's a lot of refining to happen in that process, depending on, again, where that buyer is coming from. I'll say maybe in a different thread that with the larger retailers, maybe department store or broad category-based retailers, they're looking for more profitability. And so retail media is a big investment for some of these companies. They're declaring sometimes 10x improvements in their revenue that they're able to generate there, and wanting to use AI to refine that approach in terms of how they can better position it as they go out to sell those ad spaces. So we're playing in kind of both of those ends of the spectrum in 25.
All right. Thank you all, Jason, John, Carolyn, Sabrina, Joe. Really appreciate you spending an hour with us today, plus the prep time. to share these insights with our audience. I think they're so hungry for insights on what's going on so they can compare to what they're seeing in their own businesses. So thank you so much. And to everyone listening, happy holidays. Thank you for coming to all of our webinars this year. We're going to be active with them again next year. Remember to sign up for the one on January 22nd, where we'll go deeper into what we're going to be seeing in 2025. And for those of you who are going to be in LA for the holiday party, I look forward to seeing and kind of toasting, the new year or end of year with you all then. So thank you all again. Have a great holiday and a great rest of the week.
Thanks, guys.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.